After spending $3,000 painful dollars, I finally got my hands on the iPhone 15 Pro Max and the Galaxy S24 Ultra. We're talking about the two most desired phones in the world, and very likely the best phones money can buy right now, with the exception of Xiaomi, of course. I'm so sorry, Xiaomi. In this video, we're going to compare their design, their performance, gaming, battery life, display, and of course, we're going to spend a big chunk of time comparing a lot of photos and videos to find out which one has the better camera. Finally, the one that gets the most categories will be crowned as the winner and get the Dock Trophy for the best phone of the year. As always, let's begin by talking about the design, a category that, at least in my opinion, has gotten incredibly boring in the past couple years. Back in the day, the differences between the two models were ginormous. Each one had its own unique identity, and you could very easily tell them apart. But nowadays, they are incredibly similar. They both have titanium on the sides, matte glass on the back, an edge-to-edge display on the front, and almost identical dimensions. Even when comparing their durability on a drop test, we see both receive almost the exact same amount of damage in all the tests. I think the only noticeable difference between the two is the angle of the corners. Where the iPhone has the typical curved edges, the S24 Ultra has 90-degree corners with no curvature, which has lately become kind of the signature sign of the Ultra lineup, in that even though it's amazing to play games and watch videos, it can also be a bit uncomfortable when you're trying to hold the phone with one hand. But as I said, besides this, which is also incredibly subjective, there's nothing where we could say one is better than the other. So unfortunately, I have to give them both the point in the design category. Where things get a little bit more interesting is when we talk about performance, because even though both phones have on paper the same CPU and GPU numbers and give us very close results in terms of speed and fluidity, there is a massive difference between the two phones we have to talk about, and it's that the S24 Ultra is dramatically warmer than the iPhone 15 Pro Max. Doing a 4K video render test at maximum visual fidelity, the S24 Ultra peaked at 50 degrees Celsius, scratching the maximum recommended temperature for stability on a phone, while on the other hand, the iPhone stayed under 40 degrees during the whole process. This is something I believe to be incredibly important, because beyond the tiny little differences in performance that are actually not going to have any significant difference in day-to-day use, the temperature on a phone makes a huge difference in your user experience. It is the difference between being able to use the device for 1, 2, 3 hours without any issues and literally having to drop the device on the desk because it's burning your hands. I especially noticed, and this is a disclaimer for the gamers watching this video, when I was playing Warzone Mobile. I don't know what it is about this game. I guess it's because it's very demanding, but after 20 minutes, the phone was literally insufferable. It was burning in my fingers. The only way I could get to play for a decent amount of time, like 2 to 3 matches, was using the Backbone controller, because it allowed me to play the game without having to touch the back of the S24. And it's funny because when the iPhone 15s came out, everybody was complaining about the super high temperatures that were going to ruin the phone and how Apple had completely screwed up. And after 6 months, I don't know. I have an iPhone 15, a 15 Pro, and a 15 Pro Max. I've tried all of them in a very intensive way, and I never really had any issues with the temperature. That being said though, it is also important to note that the S24 Ultra finished the 4K video rendering test at half the time compared to the iPhone and gave me a bit better experience playing games like Genshin Impact. So it gets warmer, but thanks to this, it also works a little bit better, giving us better peak performance and more prolonged peak performance. So we're back at the same spot. One of them is hotter but more powerful. The other one's cooler but a little bit less powerful. Which one should win the performance category? Well, I think I'm going to give the point to the iPhone, because even though the S24 Ultra is faster, it is only faster when it gets super hot, which is bad for you as the user and for the phone. High temperatures can literally halve a device lifespan. So no, I didn't give the point to the iPhone because I'm a sheep. I genuinely believe Apple made a better choice when it comes to the performance to heat ratio. But anyways, let's move on. Let's talk about the battery life, a category that whatever ends up happening, whichever phone ends up winning this test, it is by all means incredibly good on both phones. Whether you buy an iPhone 15 Pro Max or an S24 Ultra, you're going to get at least a full day of very intensive use without touching a charger, whatever kind of user you are. But well, let's get down to business. The test consisted in getting the two phones at 100% battery life and putting them through a very intensive 2.5-hour test to, of course, find out how much battery each one had left at the end of this 2.5 hours. It was 30 minutes of 4K video recording using the front camera, another 30 minutes of Genshin Impact at high graphics, 30 minutes of CPU and GPU benchmarks, and to top it all off, 1 straight hour exporting 4K videos in CapCut, one of the most intensive things you can do on a phone. Finally, after the 2.5 hours, well, results are what you are seeing on the screen. 47% battery life on the S24 Ultra and 63% on the iPhone. So, well, the numbers don't lie. The iPhone 15 Pro Max wins the battery category. And it's actually a little sad because I'm 99% sure that this difference has to do with the extra temperature we were talking about earlier. It only takes a quick search on Google to realize higher temperatures affect the battery life drain. It is not a coincidence that the warmer phone is the one that has the worst battery life. So Samsung, please fix this now. For a little bit more performance, you're sacrificing both user experience and battery life. I'm not really sure this is what people want. But anyways, let's move on. Let's talk about the display, a category that traditionally was always won by Samsung with higher resolution panels and better and more bleeding edge technologies. And well, this year, even though it's not for much, Samsung wins again, funny enough, with a higher resolution display and more bleeding edge technologies. More specifically, we have a 1440p panel as opposed to the slightly better than 1080p panel on the iPhone, and we have 2600 nits of brightness instead of the 2000 nits on the iPhone, which I know they are not super dramatic differences and you can barely notice when you have them side by side. But those are the only two differences. In every other way, they are exactly the same. They both have the same 120 Hertz, the same color calibration, the same size bezel, and I would say close to perfect viewing angles. As I said, the only differences are resolution and brightness, and they are both better on the S24 Ultra. I have to say though, partially this is because Samsung is the one that makes the panels, so they very cleverly give themselves their newest technologies that they then, after 1 or 2 years, pass down to the iPhone. But a winner is a winner. Let's give the display category to the S24 Ultra. And finally begin talking about the cameras, one of the most important components on a phone in 2024. Since this is the most important part of the phone for most people, I wanted to take it to the next level. I built a custom rig to compare both phones in the most exact, accurate way possible, and I'm going to take a bunch of photos, a bunch of videos in both good lighting conditions, mediocre lighting conditions, to, as I said, find out which one has the better camera. But before that, let's take a look at what each one of them is packing. To begin with, they both have an ultra-wide 12 megapixel camera. They both have a very big main sensor with 48 megapixels on the iPhone and 200 megapixels on the Samsung. We'll see if this makes a difference later. Then we have a 2x zoom camera on the iPhone with 12 megapixels, which is actually a crop on the main sensor. It's not its own independent camera, as opposed to a 3x dedicated camera on the S24. And last but not least, they both have a very big 5x zoom camera, although it is only 12 megapixels on the iPhone and 50 megapixels on the S24 Ultra. As always, let's begin by talking about the ultra-wide camera, which is actually the closest one between the two. They both have the same sensor size and the same resolution, so results are going to be very close. If we zoom in at 300%, there's no noticeable difference in sharpness or detail. The only difference is that the iPhone has more natural colors and the S24 Ultra has more vivid colors. You can tell by looking at the edges of things, which are more punchy and contrasty on the Samsung. That being said though, at night things take a big turn. Here I would say the iPhone is the clear winner, mainly because of the reflection reduction technologies it has that make images way more professional than in any other phone in the competition, and second, because it produces a lot less noise than the S24 Ultra while retaining a more natural look without excessive image processing. Then when it comes to the main camera, I've actually not noticed a single difference between the two. If you take a look at the full picture, they both have the same sharpness, the same contrast, the same dynamic range, the same blur, and if you do a 300% zoom, Well, it's the same story. Maybe in some of these images, Samsung gives you a slightly better result, but then you look at other images, and in those, the iPhone 15 Pro is giving you the better result. So they're both about the same. In fact, something that caught my attention is that Samsung, using this main camera, is not applying that vibrant, vivid look it was applying to the ultra-wide photos. It's closer to the natural look of the iPhone. It's like they're choosing to process the images less than they do with the ultra-wide camera. It's actually a little weird, but as a fan of that natural look, I'm not going to complain. And obviously, everything that I've said applies to the night mode, where, funny enough, we don't get that improved reflection reduction we got with the ultra-wide camera. We're back to a bunch of reflections on both phones. This is something that I found incredibly weird because it should be on all the cameras. It's amazing, but you'll see it later. It's actually only present on that ultra-wide camera. When we do see differences is when we're taking photos at maximum resolution. As I said earlier, on the S24 Ultra, we can take up to 200 megapixel photos, and on the iPhone, we can take up to 48 megapixel photos. In this category, and by a surprisingly long shot, Samsung is the winner. Just take a look at my dog's snout. There is a huge difference between the two. And for reference, this is the full image. It makes absolutely no sense. This is a 600% zoom. I was actually one of those people who thought 200 megapixels made absolutely no sense on a phone because they have small sensors and that it was going to make no difference in photos, but it actually does make a big difference. But my friends, things are going to get a lot more interesting. It's when we start taking zoom pictures when we start seeing the real differences between the two. Let's begin by talking about the 2x crop sensor on the iPhone and the 10 megapixel 3x sensor on the Samsung.
Here, the biggest difference I found was the noise levels on each phone. Samsung gave me consistently worse results than the iPhone in literally every picture I took.
Whether it is photos at broad daylight, photos in interiors, or at night, the images taken by the S24 Ultra have way higher levels of noise than on the 15 Pro Max. Also, very obviously, Samsung has a worse way to manage a high dynamic range. You can tell by looking at these pictures. The shadow area behind the plants is kind of visible on the iPhone, while Samsung, on the other hand, had to dim that area down to keep the rest of the image properly exposed. That being said, when it comes to detail, I don't really find any significant differences
in spite of the higher resolution on the iPhone.
And well, you could also argue that the 3x camera on the Samsung, because it has a little bit more zoom, is also a little bit more useful, but I think that comes down to personal preference. And of course, we also have to talk about the new 5x camera on each phone. Let's begin by talking about photos at broad daylight with good lighting conditions. Here, the clear winner is the S24 Ultra, giving us more detail and surprisingly a lot less noise. Oh, and also, even more important, it is more capable of differentiating between foreground and background and focusing on the thing you want to focus in a stable way. I've had very serious issues with the iPhone in this department. It's like it knows what you want to focus on, but then it focuses on the background and then the foreground again. It's very inconsistent. But well, everything said, at night things become a little bit more even. We start seeing some noise issues on the Samsung, and the only remaining difference between the two is the reliability on the focus, which is still better on the S24. Then when it comes to portrait mode, I believe they're both identical. Back in the day, Apple was the king in this category because they were very good at separating the subject from the rest of the image, but nowadays I think Samsung is doing a very comparable job. I was not able to find a significant difference, even with a substantial zoom on the image. And well, same as with the portrait mode, I believe selfies are also kind of identical between the two. The only real difference is the color science each phone is using to process the image. So yeah, summarizing, this is actually a little bit sad because traditionally the camera department always had a clear winner, but this year it is a very close tie. As I said, the S24 Ultra has a better 5x camera and it has better main camera photos thanks to the 200 megapixels, but the iPhone has better ultra wide photos at night and it has a better small zoom camera. So I don't really feel comfortable giving the category to either one of them. It is going to be a draw. I'm so sorry, my friends. But anyways, let's move on to talk about video, a very exciting category because traditionally Apple was always the winner, but Samsung keeps getting closer and closer and closer. And well, spoiler alert, I think this year Samsung is finally going to surpass them. For the first time, I think in history, we can see a better ultra-wide video on the Samsung phone as opposed to the iPhone with more detail and less noise. We have also better image stabilization than on the iPhone, which is absolutely crazy. Apple used to be the king of image stabilization.
We get better nighttime video with more detail and less distortion. And on top of all these things, we get a bunch of special features that are not even available on the iPhone.
Like 4K 120 FPS video recording, 8K 30 FPS video recording,
and a professional video mode where we can tweak pretty much anything we want.
The only things I guess I can give to the iPhone where the iPhone is better than the S24 Ultra
are that it has, number one, dramatically better 5x telephoto video.
I'm not really sure why, but the 5x on the Samsung is very weak.
And number two, and even better, it can also record ProRes log up to 4K 60 FPS.
The only issue with this feature is that it's only useful for a very tiny, super professional group of people. The average consumer watching this video is not going to take advantage of any of these things. Then, well, video recording using the main camera is almost identical. Cinematic video recording is also very close. And then macro video recording is also identical between the two phones. So yeah, summarizing, adding up all of these individual segments, I think undoubtedly Samsung has the better video camera. Let me say it again for the Apple fans. Logarithmic 4K video recording with ProRes is absolutely insane. And for a very tiny group of people, it is incredible, revolutionary, life-changing.
But 99% of people will actually never get to use it because they are not working in a big budget production, which is when this feature could come in handy.
The special features we saw on the S24 Ultra, like 4K 120 recording or 8K video, are actually usable and accessible for the average consumer. You don't have to be an expert to record 4K slow-mo video and enjoy it. And well, that's about it. We've covered every single point, every single category of the S24 Ultra and of the 15 Pro Max.
So it's time to find out which one is the winner.
When it comes to the Samsung phone, we get 4 points: design, display, photos, and videos. And when it comes to the iPhone, we also get 4 points: design, performance, battery life, and photos. We're looking at a very dreadful draw between the two phones. They both get the exact same score, so we cannot declare a winner. But don't worry, my friends, they can both share the dock trophy equally. Remember, if you want to buy any of these two phones, right now they both have a discounted price on Amazon. I left a link in the description, and now that the video is about to end, I recommend you go take a look.